through like 3, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning,
fine.
all.
Let me see.
Hi, Mike.
Hi there.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Tara.
Hi,
Hello.
Mike.
Hello.
Hi,
morning.
Tara.
Good morning,
Hi.
good
Hi,
afternoon,
Anna.
good evening. It's nice to see you all. Hi, Mariette.
Hi, Michael. Mike.
Well, it doesn't matter. I really appreciated your paper. I have to say, it was like, I was just rereading and came back across the section on just the begins with Ramatvite. And I thought that was as clear an exposition of the sort of genesis of intersubjectivity as one could possibly want. That was just really nice. So,
Well, thank you. I hope it can be useful in these times, you know.
Yeah, of course. I understand. We have a number of other people we are expecting to have arrive. Have you all sort of said hello to each other? It's nice, like not really.
A little bit.
We could just start. I mean, I just don't know who knows each other or not. Just to say a word, we know who Mariette. Why don't you speak for yourself? Let each person sort of just say a couple of sentences about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm Mariette de Haan, and I'm a professor at Utah University in the Department of Pedagogy and Education, as we call it. I like to deal with a diversity of topics, but lately, well, since more or less 2017, I've been more engaged with the issue of polarization, which tunes in with my interest for diversity in general. And so, yeah, that's basically. I can talk more about the paper. I could, you know, I say something about the paper, the background of it, but that's about me for now.
Okay. Alfredo, I'm just coming down my screen here. Just going.
Yeah. Hi, nice to see you all. I'm Alfredo Jornet. I'm here in Oslo at the Faculty of Educational Sciences. And I'm very much interested in dialogism generally, and I'm so lucky to have been invited to contribute to the same book where Mariette has written this chapter with a commentary. So I've been reading both Mariette's chapter and other chapters that deal with dialogism in relation to polarization generally and also societal crisis. And I think it couldn't be a more relevant topic. I personally work with education for sustainability. I've been working with that topic for the last 3 years, very much focused on being outside in the field and connecting concerns of education with activism outside of education. And these issues of talking across boundaries and dealing with difference are just as important can be. So I'm very glad to be here.
Okay. Anna.
Hi, everyone. I am Anna Marjanovic-Shane, now in Philadelphia here from the University of Students, a very new university, experimental, international, that a group of us tried to found. It's still in the process of birth, but it's very relevant because the original founders were from Russia and from Ukraine and from all around the world. But when the war started, that was kind of like a knockdown for us because some of the people didn't want to communicate anymore with each other. And of course, for me, it's very relevant. Also, the topic also because of my experiences during the wars in Yugoslavia that were very dramatic. I mean, war was very dramatic. My experiences in trying to continue dialogues there. So I think it's a very timely topic. My interest is in dialogue, democratic education, and early childhood play and creativity in connection to the democratic and dialogic relationships.
Wow, Beth.
Hi, nice to see everyone. I'm Beth Fairholt. I'm at Brooklyn College and at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. And at Brooklyn College, I teach the people who will become preschool teachers. And I'm interested in ways to keep dialogue happening in my classrooms during these sort of wars in my field over schoolification versus play-based learning. And also in thinking about the paper in relation to the work I do with the young children. So inclusion in play and dialogue in play.
Yeah.
And thank you for speaking to us.
Dana.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Dana Aristizábal. I'm from Colombia, but currently I am doing my PhD in the Universidad de Brasilia. I was invited for a professor, Anna Marjanovic, a professor Silvia Barbato. I'm currently working in a dialogical approach to conflicts in a school in Colombia. Thinking about the context of agreement of past. So my interest is about a discursive approach about the conflicts and tensions between children.
Got it. Julian.
Thank you very much.
Julian Williams from Manchester University, UK. I've come because I was interested in this paper. I've always been, well, I've for many years been interested in dialogism and dialogue in classrooms. Recently, my interests have become much more aligned in the last 3 years with green research issues. So I'm kind of on the edge at the moment between classrooms, mathematics education, and activism in the communities around the challenges, etc. So yeah, I'm very interested to see how the conversation goes.
Great. Thank you, Julian. Tara.
Thank you, Mike, for this opportunity. Yeah, I'm Tara Ratnam from India. I was working as a teacher, ESL teacher, and teaching students who are historically disadvantaged. And so I've had a lot of opportunity in the classroom to explore how I could create opportunities for them to really make them feel seen and valued, and where they could really take full, participate as full members in the classroom, creating meaning and contributing to class actively, using their diverse resources that they bring to school. So now, as an independent teacher, educator, and researcher, I'm using my kind of experience over the years now to help teachers explore, how it is, what inclusivity means in their practice. I'm also trying to help them to become reflective about their own practice and think about the meaning that they kind of bring to their practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Jill?
Hello, I'm Jillian McNamee in Chicago, and I've spent my career studying the development of children 3 to 8 years of age and focusing on teacher development, both the preparation of preschool and primary teachers, as well as providing ongoing supports for teachers in public school systems. And the topic of today's discussion is right up my alley, because I could just see, in my view, teachers of young children have the chance to lay a blueprint for the kind of difficult conversations we need all the way through the education system. And I had the chance to work with Vivian Paley, who was the topic of our discussion a couple of weeks ago, and she was a master at getting 3 and 4-year-olds discussing difficult topics. And that's what I have loved doing, is going into schools. So I really worried about these children we read about today, who very young adults who are not able to discuss, rather not have conversation than get into them. And it just really intrigues me. And I like to look at where we can begin to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you, Joe. Ola, good evening. We're introducing ourselves.
Okay, sorry, I was a bit late.
That's okay.
I'm Ola Ørsted. I'm a professor at the Department of Education at the University of Oslo in Norway. So my background, I've been working on issues of technology in Norwegian school systems for some years, and aspects of digital literacy and what that means today. But last 10 years, I worked on issues of formal and informal ways of learning, and what that also means today. I'm working on concepts of boundary crossing and things like that. So we've had some projects in some communities in Norway, addressing some of the issues that are highlighted by Mariette today. And recently I am now leading a big European project on family life today. So it's focusing more on families in 5 European countries.
Whoa. Well, welcome everybody. So Mariette, I'm going to just now turn it over to you and to why don't you contextualize things for us? Everybody here has read your paper. I've forwarded, we had only 3 or 4 comments, and I've only this morning forwarded them to, Julian's reminding me I'm not seeing the whole screen, perhaps.
Yeah, I believe there is someone.
Oh, I totally didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Let me read. Guillaume, that's somebody else was added and you came off the screen. I'm sorry.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Oh yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
Good
Julian.
evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
I'm Guillaume Isaac. I'm a PhD student. I have studied at Université Côte d'Azur, France. I'm currently in the 3rd year of my PhD, and I work, sorry about that, it's commute time for me. So I work on collaborative, creative problem solving with a particular interest in sustainable development, systemic contradictions, and conflicts of motives. I use a cultural historical activity theory framework a lot. And thank you for letting me be a part of this conversation. Very much looking forward to it. I'm expecting to take my bus in about 15 minutes. So I'll do my best to interact with you. But yeah, please bear with me. Thank you.
Mike, you're muted.
We look forward to you contributing insofar as your your conditions permit. Some version of what you're in, pretty much everybody's somewhere. So thanks. We look forward. Okay, Mariette.
Yeah, it's inspiring to hear that how people try to be here, even if they're on, transporting. So that's inspiring to me. I should make a better effort to join more often. But let me explain to you a bit how this all started, because I told you that I was always interested in issues of diversity, more from the perspective of, let's say, disadvantaged group in society who were not represented in scientific theory and these kind of issues. Around 2015-16, in European context, this issue of polarization became like a big thing. Like everybody was shaken by it. I'm sure it has a somewhat different form in other contexts, in the United States, for instance, and elsewhere. But in the European context, this all started with perhaps with 9/11, but later on also with the rise of ISIS and terroristic bombing in European capitals. And this has shaken, the population and so especially the tensions between the Muslim and Muslim populations, and these tensions also heavily impacted on our urban city schools. So that's how it started. As a citizen, I was very worried, but also being a university professor, I was approached by school boards who said, in these schools, these tensions are becoming very intense between Muslim and non-Muslim students, between teachers of that same background, and nobody knows what to do. And one of them came to me and she said at a certain occasion to me, Mariette, your research could be relevant there. Why don't you do anything? And I thought, okay, well, I can't deny this request. And this is how it all started. And then in my city, the city of Utrecht, which is a central city, one of the central cities in the Netherlands, there was this initiative from the municipality that was called Utrecht Together, where they wanted to, they were very afraid for segregation but mostly for radicalization of youth. And so they started this project and they brought the university, school boards and municipality together. And I was asked to lead a project to do something against these tensions, to come up with an intervention. So that is how my interest was aroused for the topic. And we started to organize roundtables with teachers and school principals around these issues. And I'm still writing a review of interventions that is a bit of a trouble. I've written a piece on these roundtables, which is currently under review. And I wrote this piece on invitation of Ola and his co-editors because they wanted to write this book on Rommerfight, and I believe that you will also give some background information on the book, right? Ola, right? Yeah?
I could.
Yeah,
I
think Mike asked you to do so, right?
Yeah, sure.
But okay, so this context in which well, actually, because of these roundtables and the fact that I was leading them, brought me very close to these conflicts in schools, where teachers said, students live in separate worlds, and it's getting worse. And they were avoiding certain topics. They weren't interested in each other's worlds. And they seemed to say, or they said, well, our old methodologies to tackle this is not working anymore. So that was challenging me a lot. So, this was a situation, which was the start of the chapter, I would say. So, and I thought I was seeing that dialogue was both, something that they believed in, but something that was not working. And they didn't, and nobody understood really why it wasn't working. So that was really intriguing to me. And so I started to ask these questions of how can we understand dialogue? So is dialogue in such a conditions in which parties are driven apart, not even interested in talking? So how does dialogue work? And I thought, well, being a scientist of education, perhaps I could do something with theory and try to convert that into practical guidelines. So I really, in this chapter, I wanted to be useful. I'm more than I usually try, and I thought, on every idea that I'm learning, I don't want it to be just an interesting idea for my own intellectual satisfaction, but I want to think about what it means for practice. So that's how I started this chapter. So then after some work, I was able to group it into these 3 questions, right? Which I ask in this chapter. So the first question that I asked is, how can we create just inclusive and welcoming dialogical spaces for everybody. And so this is where I found much help in Habermas' work and the controversy between Habermas and Bouffe about the design of these neutral, fair spaces at the level of democracies mostly, but I think that we can use these ideas also for designing such spaces in, for instance, schools and other public institutions. Then the other question, the second question that I'm asking is whether dialogue will still work between parties that represent completely different worldviews that are considered to be incompatible. And this was often the case. The teacher said to me, you know, these students, they come up with this vision that, you know, all truth is based in Islam, or this is not allowed for Islam, and then somebody else would say, but you know, for me, liberty is the key value, and we do not acknowledge these religious books, etc. So often, you know, they were dealing with situations with worldviews that were incompatible. And I've been interested in this topic of compatibility, incompatibility between cultural frames for a longer time. And I've been reading the work of a Greek philosopher who's now in Australia, Papasagayadis, and he speaks from language philosophy and what he calls the politics of difference. And I was always fascinated by this concept of cultural translation, which is, in my view, a realistic concept because it acknowledges the difference between these cultural systems. But it also is optimistic because it explains that while once you start to, you know, involve in active translation, you can only partly translate, you know, what the other is saying according to your own system. And this is an ongoing dynamic in which gradually the system, both systems are changing, and there's always this residue that cannot be translated, which causes for constant dynamic, which sort of spurs this translation in a sort of weird and understandable way. And this has always fascinated me, but I think it's a hopeful perspective. And also the idea from McIntyre, you know, the idea of a third language that can mediate, I thought that was also a helpful idea there. Then lastly, now I come to Rammetveit, which, you know, of course, because of the invitation, but also because Rammetveit was one of my old heroes when I started my careers in Utrecht University. Rammetveit was booming, and it was, so between my colleague, it was the idea, if you want to understand communication, then you should read Rammetveit. And so I was very thankful to Ola and his colleagues to bring to me back Rammetveit. And I had already told Ola that I was a fan of Rammetveit early on. And he's been very helpful in this process because, and just studying it again, because I didn't know what he was going to bring me when I started to restudy him. But it has proved very useful because, especially because Rammetveit on the one hand says, you know, communication is not self-evident, or understanding is not self-evident, but we have this natural inclination for communication where we already assume that we are both responsible, or all parties are responsible for creating this common ground, common perspective, and also the idea that even if you never have a completely shared world, you are able to create this common ground and to move forward. And I thought that was an interesting thought, because if this is already the case for, say, regular, of course we don't know what is regular communication, but then this is a comforting thought also for situations where parties are far apart and are not willing to communicate. So I thought these were useful ideas. So I tried to, with some difficulties, to think through how these ideas could lead to, you know, designing such spaces. And I am inspired coming back to this, designing these spaces that are allowing for multiple parties to participate, and are these sort of fair spaces, neutral spaces. I do agree with the critiques on Habermas that this might be a too optimistic vision, but I'm still inspired by the optimistic voice of this, the enlightened side of this idea. At the same time, I also value Mufis' voice, his critical voice, where this postmodern critical theory perspective comes in. And I like to play with both to see, if we can combine such very diverse visions and take them to account when you try to design these, not perfect, but play spaces where we can where we can start to develop such dialogues between parties that do not at first want to communicate or have difficulties to communicate. So I think the last thing that I would like to share with you is that thinking about the war in Europe, and I don't know how central or how important this war is to all of you being so apart, different parts of the world. But for me, I doubt at first whether this chapter would still be relevant, given the war in Ukraine. And I think, not all of these ideas can be applied to a war situation, especially because if I'm thinking of studying dialogue in this war, I mean, you could even ask the question: is this a dialogue? Is there even a readiness for dialogue, right? So that's where I realized that my thinking was maybe more context specific than I realized, and I probably want to explore the idea of writing something about dialogue in war. What does dialogue mean in war? So if there is this treaty about the grain, about the grain that's being exported now in Ukraine, there is no direct dialogue about this. This is a treaty that's been established between both Russia and Ukraine separately, but in a way it is communicative, because they have an mutual understanding of this deal and how they should act. So there is a sort of a common space, but they do not directly engage in dialogue. They need other parties to make a treaty with them. So, and also I want to remember the meeting with Jim Wirch, where where he talked about these narratives that somehow are limited and repeated, and that we have limited language for creating these narratives, and maybe I mean these kind of thoughts are perhaps also necessary to combine with these insights that I'm sharing today to address discourse dialogue in a war situation, like the fixing of narratives and not loosening them up, the limitations of them, etc., etc. So this is more or less, this should contextualize the piece. Maybe I can hand it over, Mike, to Ola to tell something about the book.
I could do that. Thank you, Mariette. I mean, it's a very important part of this book, which started after we had a seminar in Oslo on the legacy of Rommet White, really. Because he's more or less forgotten in a Norwegian context. He was in the Department of Psychology. They never attended our seminar, so it's been bewildering for us why he has disappeared out of sight, sort of. So it was a way to really address some of his key ideas and how it links to Bakhtin, Wittgenstein, and others he was were influenced by. So this started as a book where we wanted to focus on the dialogue in our times today, and it grew more out towards issues of polarization. So it became more and more upfront. So it's not a book about Rommetveit as such. It's more an inspiration, but trying to address different issues on different levels. So it's a book coming out by Oxford University Press. Hopefully now during spring 2023. It's been quite a long process for different reasons. But we have different contributions from around the world. And it links both to issues of the dialogue from Rommetveit, but it also has a main focus on the role of education today. So what kind of place do we see for education in these times? So it was sort of the project, or the book was starting out from some of our, like Mariette, we did some work in communities and see how they became more polarized in a way, and how teachers especially struggled to find meaningful ways to address some of these polarizations. But also we've had several projects on dialogism and dialogic perspectives as such, trying to contextualize that. But when we started working with the book end of 18 until now, it's been a story after another about polarization in our societies, Trump area, now the war, everything. So it's sort of, it tells us that there is some key issues there. So we have Jim Wirtz is co-editing with the book with me, together with a colleague here in Oslo, Bente Hagtvedt from Special Needs Education. And we have Pierre Linnell and Jan Walsener and colleagues also involved in more theoretical perspectives. And then Mariette is in a section together with Beatrice Ligorio from Rome, explaining a project they're having with a school in Rome and the community around the school in that part of Rome. And then we have another part more on technology, and the last part is focusing more on classroom interaction between teachers and students on different educational levels. So it's been an interesting development. It's taken time, so it's more or less finished now. Just waiting for a couple of contributions, and we'll send it out in the middle of December, the whole manuscript. Yep.
You're muted, Mike.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I'm unmuted. So the book will come out and it'll be printed, and then what? So, you know,
it will be open access.
That's excellent. But beyond that, I'm impressed, and I'd like to hear from Beth and Jill, but we've had, what, half a dozen of sessions. We started with Jim Wirtz, right? But we weren't focused on this issue. On the other hand, we ended up where we had one session on the application of ideas from sort of Vygotskian preschool ideas in the realm of international relations and the avoidance or mitigation of conflict. And it seems like almost every topic we've touched on in one way or another is relevant. It just resonates around these discussions. There ought to be a way in this case to take what you have and distill it down and make it something like much more accessible in each of its pieces. Almost like a collage, but a montage, if you like, a multidimensional montage that puts together your stuff and gets it out to a large audience. I'm impressed by a very recent experience of mine. We've just posted something on a website on social epistemology, which I came to, never mind how I got to that page. And that it is dedicated to getting a very large audience looking at what it is that's going on there. And any sort of efforts that I've ever made seem like tiny bits of something compared to the power of people to create media that will get ideas to go viral. And these are ideas that need to go viral. So I'm sort of, it's great that it's open access. That's absolutely wonderful. If I tried to publish something like that, I wouldn't get any support for doing that. So it's really the combination of on the ground stuff, of the theoretical background, and its inadequacy is really interesting. I have one question for everybody in this sort of everybody, and I know I would like to really hear from Anna, because she's been through this backwards and forwards, and she knows a lot about the actual possibilities and limits on the possibilities of creating the conditions for this. So I think, not to take Anna, I think I'll just, rather than saying anything more, I'd rather turn it over to you now before I have, not for me to speak, because you're the most experienced in the middle of it person I know.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And also, I only have another 15 minutes before I
all the
need
more
to go
so.
to another Zoom with
yeah.
another topic completely.
Okay.
Okay. But yeah, I wanted to say thank you, first of all, Mariette, for starting these questions and giving a very interesting and I think significant frame to them and I immediately will have to disagree with some things in that frame. But I think if we are, let's say, dialoguing now in a very friendly and safe place, we can not go for agreement. And this is what I wanted to talk about, is that there are dialogues, disagreements, where nobody is trying to actually push their own views on anybody else, and nobody feels pressured to, but everybody can feel appreciated even in big disagreements. For instance, you can have that in many sports. I'm always going back to play, because all the games of contest are really dialogues with disagreement, where nobody is going to bridge anything. Everybody stays in this tension of disagreement, and they can meet again in another game and in another game and constantly test each other's mettle. And I think that dialogue is always hitting not just the topic of mutual interest. If there is a mutual interest, it could be mutual interest that comes for different reasons. That the interest may seem that it's mutual, but has different reasons for different parties, which have to be acknowledged also as legitimate. So in other words, if we are talking about ideological or religious difference, not going for converting anyone, not going to denigrate anyone, but being able to try to just with big interest find out what it means for that person or for that group. Recently, we are reading a book for our book club in the University of the Students, that is How to Talk to Science Deniers. I think it would be very interesting for this people understanding. For instance, he starts with the author, Lee McIntyre, with describing his visit to the conference of the flat earthers. People who believe that Earth is flat, and they very sincerely believe that. For them, it's not a hoax. And what he finds out is part of their identity. To destroy their belief is to destroy in some way themselves. So even though it seems like totally ridiculous, from our point of view, you have to understand that from their point of view, they see a big conspiracy. that everybody is lying about, space flight and moon and all kinds of things, and that they just and they sincerely try to examine it. It may, from our point of view, look like childish, like totally crazy, but if you express that, you are not going to convert them or they're just going to dig deeper down because it's part of the identity. And that's one of the, I think, very complicated things about dialogue, that it has to accept the identity of the other in order to even talk to them. And that means that you cannot go for the goal of bridging. And I think it's very good that you're starting with creating spaces, creating environment, creating ecology in which dialogue can happen. And one of the things that throughout various different experiences and things that I know from the Yugoslav war is that you have to be ready to play with people with whom you don't necessarily agree, and to test your ideas and to test their ideas, but ready to be tested yourself. And ready to be also going away from each other, not with disgust, but in some kind of respect that somebody wanted to talk to you at all. So I think of dialogue more as like a canary in the tunnel. It's not a tool, it's a symptom of that there is willingness of interacting with each other in some way, which may be also not only positive interaction, but at least there is engagement. There is no complete abandoning and saying, I will never see you again, and I don't want to be, and I want to separate and go away somewhere and never again communicate. So I think all kinds of communications are in some way, they have traces of dialogue. That may lead to worse or to better situations, but I think it could be.
Oh, you're muted.
You muted yourself.
Sorry, I was just, my hands muted myself. From my studies of play, just to say how I think it connects. I don't know how many of you, I know Beth knows, maybe Mike knows, that I'm talking about 3 parallel chronotopes. It's a Bakhtinian concept of unity of time, space, and value system. And in play, even Vygotsky talked about the imaginary and the real plane. I think that there is a third one, which is a community of players, where completely different rules are than in the imaginary and in the real, where the responsibility of players is to accept each other as people, their identity. And another responsibility is to be interesting, create, to in a way move the story that's in the imaginary plane. But the imaginary is the pretend. And so I think when they create different activities that involve the play or pretending, while working on that pretend, which is not real, just like hypothetical, then the relationships between people around that limited topic can start to be more interested in each other, because the topic may be something that's very important to each other. My colleague Ljubica Benjanski-Ristic, Beth knows her from Belgrade, who had for years a drama group and the Early Childhood Education Cultural Center for children from 3 to 6. She also worked in a camp for the children refugees from Yugoslav wars. And she was the only one who could create a program that was better than the psychologist or sociologist could, because it was all based on creating playful pretend activities in which people could step out of the current reality in order to create something else that maybe looks like irrelevant for their current reality. But in that process, they can discover other aspects of each other identity, other ways of communicate which are not hurtful to each other, but create a place where wondrous things can happen that are interesting to everyone. So I think working on these kinds of things that are not direct but indirect in some ways, where people create a communication on many different levels and touch each other as people and be accepted, not only because they have a different ideology, but maybe because they are great cooks or can do puppet shows or who knows what, because then the communication becomes much more inclusive and you never know how and where something is going to touch somebody else, so that each identity can in a way be even transcended or strengthened, and it doesn't have to be coming together. It has to be just being able to live together. That's kind of in a nutshell what I wanted to say. One more thing I want to say, and I'm sorry I didn't know about your working on that book. I'm working on a special issue of our Journal for Dialogic Pedagogy, which is about dialogue and democratic schools, or democracy, democratic education, democratic schooling and dialogue. And one of bulk of the articles there that I wrote came from a deep study of, maybe Ulla will know, of the experimental school in Oslo. That was the first democratic school in Scandinavia that lasted for, I think, 27 years or something like that. Maybe you are aware of that school, probably know it. And I did several different types of analysis of one very crucial dramatic meeting that the students had in 1967, just 2 months after they opened that school, which their first leader, when she wrote about that school, called something like a fireworks in a can. The school almost fell apart 2 months after it opened because of deep disagreements that they had. There was a group of 20 students who founded that school, who worked for a whole year about all kinds of ideas, but then they accepted a lot more. They had a requirement for the Ministry of Education to be at least 150 students when they opened it. And when they accepted other people who were not with them, they encountered incredible differences of opinion about what school should be, and they were running the school. So I think that may be very interesting, and I hope it will be published. Now it's already a 4-year project. It will be published probably in January. We are just waiting for the introduction and the closing chapter to be done, which I think it will be all done by the end of January. Everything else is ready. And I think it will be, of course, all free. Our journal is totally free and totally free from any kind of payments or any. Everybody can download anything they want. So, okay,
folks. Well, Anna's here. Perhaps somebody would like to ask a question or riff off of what she had to say.
Yeah, maybe I can briefly react, because I recognize a lot what you say. It's very wise what you say, and I do agree that dialogue, or that the chapter sort of might provoke the idea that it's all about ideologies or opinions, and that we just talking about these opinions and we solve the issue. And from the round tables that we had, it was clear that this was not the only solution. The teachers knew that this was not the only thing they needed to do. They came up with all kinds of things that you are suggesting, like music and play and all these things. So, and in these when people sometimes are in the situation, they sometimes ask themselves, is dialogue really in this way that you are saying? I don't think this is the answer. Is this helpful at all? Because it seems to worsening the relationship. So shouldn't we work on the relationship? But for me, the question is, we can't, I mean, dialogue and language and talk about ideas, we couldn't do away with it either, because it's an important sort of tool indeed that we have as human beings. So yes, I do agree, we sometimes focus on it too much, but on the other hand, it's a powerful tool also to come together. So I don't know how you would weight this. I mean, we can't, I don't think we can say it shouldn't be a tool. It is also a tool to bring people together, to me.
Well, anything can be made into a tool. But I think once you make dialogue into a tool, I think that is an illusion that the dialogue in itself is something that changes. It could be in a constellation of many other things, and it works on these different. I think people in dialogue are similar to people in play. They have something to talk about. They have something how to relate to each other. They have something that makes them interested in each other for different, and it could be for different reasons. But like play, a good play does not have predefined ending. You don't know how it's going to end. And that's true for dialogue too. And that because of that, it's not a good tool. It's a one of it's. I think the real first intention about everything should be to make a world a better place for everyone, and then dialogue will appear when people start being interested around something like that.
Yeah. Thanks.
I have a question I'd like to ask, especially while you're still here, Anna, and you and Mariette, but especially while you're here. I've thought a lot about this issue, and I wonder about people working in it very rarely or never refer to the work of Sharif and Sharif in the Robbers Cave experiment. Now, I don't know how many of you know what the Robbers Cave experiment is. Anybody? All right, I'll forward a real description of it to the list. But this goes back to the Germans who were escaping fascism, like Kurt Lewin and others, who created Adorno, worrying about fascism within the United States, never mind anywhere else. And the basic experiment is at a Robbers Cave State Park. That's why it's called the Robbers Cave. Nothing to do with the Robbers Cave. They meet in this park, and they bring two groups of kids to the park for a summer program. In the first part of the summer program, they're on two sides of a mountain. In the first part of the summer program, they have games and variety of kinds of things that they do in summer camps completely separately. They then arrange for the two groups to find each other. When they find each other, they organize a rope pull. So that a rope pull is where two groups of people pull on opposite ends of the rope. And usually you have something like mud or something in the middle if you really want to make it gooey. And so the losing side gets pulled through the mud, but it's antagonistic. All right. When they bring the antagonism in, the counselors allow the antagonism to go where it will. So it ends up where one group finds out the other group is away from camp, and they go and they steal something from the camp and bring it back. So they basically create a situation of war between the two groups. One interesting thing just at that part of the experiment is that the sociogram of the two groups changes. The people who are kind of leaders in peace are not the people who are leaders in war. So there's a structure that organizes. They then bring the kids together to watch a movie. It starts a food fight where the kids in the movie get completely out of control and it makes the antagonism worse. Okay. They then try another joint activity. It makes it worse. And then they organize to take the kids on a bus on a trip. And in the course of the trip, they arrange for the bus to get stuck going off the road to park, and it can't back up and they can't go home. Right? At which point they organize the kid. Oh, okay. I want to do one other thing. So that's one of the things that they do is they get them working on a common problem that way. But prior to the truck scene, they arrange for the water tank at the top of the mountain that supplies both groups to be broken. And they then pair up kids and create small mixed groups of kids, basically a couple, and send them everywhere looking, and they eventually arrive at the mountain. And then they have to get up there, and there's a ladder, but nobody can do the ladder unless they all do the ladder. So they all do the ladder, right? And they all do the ladder, and then they go back, and the next day to celebrate getting the water back, that's when they take the trip with the kids on the truck, on the bus. Mm-hmm. They arrange, so then it ends with the kids all pulling on the same end of the rope to get the truck back so that they can go back to their camp. You should take a look at it, because I think it's, in the most abstract fashion, I think what it does is it focuses Hitler. I remember I once visited our governor, Jerry Brown, and in his office, he had this sort of, he was making an argument that what the Democratic Party needed was a strong man to bring everybody together. And my dad had this quotation from Hitler about the need for creating a common enemy. That was just absolutely, that's it. So you create a common problem where each survival depends upon the other. Now, that's an extreme, but it's tiny. And as Mariette was saying, gosh, if it was just before we thought the war came, we might even be able to get a hold of some of these problems. We might be able to create a context to bring people together in a way. This includes all of your ways of doing it, Anna. I'm just saying sort of abstractly, it focuses you on how do you create the conditions for an activity. Dialogue of some sort is always, interaction of some sort is constitutive of an activity. You're confusing the medium and the activity that the medium is mediating. So you want them both. Of course, it's an activity, but it's an activity which requires for its implementation certain forms of dialogue. So I think in an abstract way, we know in a sense what to do, but we don't control the circumstances. And therefore, if you can create a make-believe or an as-if or some sort of something that breaks the dichotomies enough so that people can find out other people live there too, right? So I think, but nobody refers to that. And I'll send a description around. Yeah. It's important, I think.
Right. One of the things that in our classes for the pre-service teachers, Eugene and I developed, and he was really, Eugene Matosov instrumental. Yeah. He was really the leader in that, is to create an open appreciation of disagreement, because for dialogue, disagreement is what pulls dialogue. Once everybody agrees, there is nothing more to dialogue about. So complete agreement is kind of annihilating dialogue because there is nothing more to say. We all agree. So disagreement is great for critical approach to analyzing situations, but only if you can keep this disagreement to not go ad hominem, to not attack other people's identity, just to pick on the ideas and to try to examine them and test those ideas. So in other words, any kind of disagreement in a discussion on whatever we are discussing, how to solve bullying or whatever, is appreciated and openly supported because it brings a different idea. So welcoming differences, welcoming different ideas, is a part of keeping the dialogue. Not immediately saying, oh no, you can't do that. I have great examples now from Belgrade. I was just spent 2 months there. And one of the things that I did, I went to a high school to discuss something that we have done before together with their teacher and them. This great drama teacher who was their teacher completely constantly was cutting their dialogue because she didn't agree with their points of view. And she immediately was expressing that disagreement. And of course, in the situation of being a teacher, disagreeing with the student shuts the student down immediately. And so they stop talking, they stop thinking, they stop analyzing and testing these ideas. So we had to go back to our classes just before the 2020 election, an incredible class with the students in Delaware about their views on politics, and half of them were Republicans. And it was such a helpful class to all of us to understand what are all different ways and reasons that people will vote Republican, and why would people vote Democrat. And the atmosphere was made such that everybody could completely in a very safe situation, express their opinions and not be ridiculed by anyone, but just kind of like, could you go deeper into that and tell us where it come or how it formed, or if you have doubts or something like that. So with a great appreciation for the author of the opinion with whom you don't disagree, you can just look at all the different ways of beliefs and motivations that people have without any attack, and everybody can talk about it.
That's the goal. The issue is, how do you get there? How do you create the medium where that can happen?
Well, if in the class, I think what's very important, and it doesn't have to be a political issue, it could be any kind of our ideas, scientific ideas about development or about education. I think it's very important for the teacher not to actually have their own opinion and position known. You can introduce that idea, but as some idea there in the sphere, some people think, but not as your opinion. Mm-hmm. In that way, you as an authority are invisible through your opinion. You're just visible as somebody who mediates various ideas of various people. Mm-hmm. And that opens up that space, because as soon as the authority tells their opinion, they're an expert, or they know better than anybody else. Plus, they can grade you too. So, what's the point then of discussing or thinking? You may think of that. You may still stay with your ideas, but they're not examined for the student. Mm-hmm. So I was always proud if students at the end of semester asked me, which happened several times, but not always. He said, we now know all these different ideas, but we don't know what you think. What do you think? Mm-hmm. And then if they asked me, I would tell them.
Mm-hmm. You're late for a meeting.
Yeah, I will. So I already texted that I'll be late.
Okay.
All right. So I still want to stay another 5 or 10 minutes to hear what everybody else thinks.
Right.
Anna, I want to build on what you were saying. I think you just gave a wonderful description of what my goal would be for every teacher. It's not important what the teacher believes or thinks, but can they put that to the background and say, how are we going to work on a problem if some people think the world is round and some think it's flat? That's interesting. How do we get some more data, get some more points of view, and think about problems? So I think you've given a great description of what I think, and it goes back to some comments Beth was making in a discussion we were having 2 weeks ago about listening, that I think a really important quality in a discussion leader, and I do like to think of it as a teacher, certainly must have those skills to watch the development of ideas. And what becomes important is how do people explain their point of view? But it brings me to the question of Mariette. I wonder if you can describe for us the context and the problem where no dialogue happened, that your data comes from, because as a school teacher, I'm thinking and I'm very interested to watch both in the US and in Europe, particularly what's happening in countries as we absorb refugees from different wars. I think the war is not only obviously in the Ukraine, but the you might say the whole world changes as our communities bring in larger and larger numbers of people who are different from us. So Mariette, my point of view would be, darn, we're going to have some literature classes, we're going to have some math, we're going to have some science. You come from this part of the world, here's what we've been working on. If we're to pick some novels, artwork, music to study, to learn about all kinds of concepts, what are we going to pick? It makes a difference whether we ask representatives from different cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds, what would be a good novel representative of, or several points of view from your background, and bring that to the discussion. So I couldn't quite tell where the breakdowns came and why. And I think that would take us back into this activity setting, its goals, and who's guiding the discussion, because I couldn't quite pinpoint how to get my hands around what wasn't working.
Well, we don't know exactly, but from my analysis of the conversations of the teachers, there seems to be, a big controversy between the minority and the majority positions, where the minority position is we are not accepted, we are discriminated against, and we are always seen as, lower ranking citizens. And whereas the majority point of view is that you came here, but you really don't want to play our game. You don't know the rules. You don't want to play the rules according to our game. So that was basically the analysis of the teachers. And so I think in these, I do agree with Anna that dialogue is, you can't explain this by looking at dialogue from the perspective of ideas that come together or not. There's always deeper layers of problems of disagreement or separatedness below, such as not being accepted or status differences that are very identity issues that lay behind these problems. And so I think the teachers couldn't pinpoint it really, but and they come up indeed they come up indeed with this idea that it becomes because the reason is because they live in different worlds, but it's not only that, it's also their position in society. They're not accepted as full citizens and all these kind of issues. So that maybe that contextualizes a little bit more. And we've been talking a lot about what are the different solutions and that you could use for solving this issue of polarization, and dialogue was absolutely not the only one to talk about ideas in that sense. There were a lot of different solutions that were shared, such as, for instance, and this is a little bit sort of reacts to what you were telling, Mike, on that story in the Roberts Cave. Some school principals would believe in having the students fight for a common cause or something. So I've been doing this analysis of what what kind of interventions do we have for such situations in the literature and education? And there's a wide variety of ideas. The only problem is we don't know really what works there. But I'm trying to order it a little bit, but there's a wide variety of solutions, and educational professionals are super creative in coming up with solutions. It's very difficult to order them because you can do it in multiple ways. It's everything from conflict mediation to engaging them in social community engagement, or training, anti-bias training, all kinds of things.
Right. So we have I think the sort of equivalent currently in the United States is where we have poor communities of color and white teachers walking in from other neighborhoods. Right. Where it's just like so those are extremely difficult circumstances in which to bring people together, which is why you note that before, when somebody was reeling off, Jill was reeling off the kinds of things you do, she said, find a novel, find art, find hip hop music, find this, find that. Probably not the classroom where everything is in talk with all of the seats in a row sitting forward is probably the last place you'd want to try to engage in that, but it's an art, right? That's the art of teaching that we see in Vivian Paley and lots of other preschool teachers who love the children to death. And we want to move it from an art to a social, to a viral practice, right? Something like that.
Can I that, Mike, because you keep saying that you want to move it from an art to a viral practice, and also you keep saying about how in the Vivian Paley example there's an ability to control these variables that we don't have at a larger I'm somehow having trouble seeing, like I was very interested in this paper because I, as a college professor, am seeing just what you talk about. Like I usually, whenever we have a vote, like I tell my students to go vote, and I said something about this being an important vote in the U.S. this year, our concerns about fascism across the globe, and for the first time I had one student. I teach in Brooklyn, so I teach students who are coming from all over the world, and for the first time I had one student who will become a preschool teacher who was from Brazil and clearly voting conservative, and she was very upset with me. And so that was the first time we had that's the first time I've ever said something like that and had that response in a preschool classroom. So I'm aware that this paper is very timely, but then on the other side, I feel like, which I sort of heard Anna saying, I think maybe I'm misinterpreting, but just this sense that like, this is what it is to be human, is not to make things go viral, but to, I guess what I'm questioning is like, if this viral message is the right way to create change. I keep thinking about that the play is art, and what does this mean to like take it out? I mean, I think this is sort of a question for Gil, but like what for everyone who's reading Paley is like, why do we think we have to change what Paley's doing in order to scale up? Maybe it's just like more of the same. That's a very inarticulate, honest question from my heart as I'm thinking about these issues. It's like, because what happened with this Brazilian student who was very mad at me after I made that statement was really over several weeks creating a play together on another issue, which had to do with, it was completely unrelated, but like we formed a relationship around this, we found a bus, but it was through art, and it was through playfulness together. It was like a bus to pull together a common but it wasn't different from what Vivian Paley does. It wasn't sort of, but then it was just one student I was helping. So it was, I had just transferred Vivian Paley's work with the young ones into the undergraduate classroom, and I had still only reached one student, but I'm just sort of not convinced. I'm thinking actually of Sarah Schulman's new book on ACT UP work and how the ACT UP work was a direct outcome of the art, anarchy, resistance, organizing work that was already happening before AIDS. Is that too inarticulate to be? Anyhow, that's what I keep thinking, Mike, when you say, but we have to get viral instead of art, and we have to go to a situation where we can control more of the variables. I'm just wondering how that.
No, I didn't say anything about variables. I didn't say anything. I just said.
In the Paley conversation, you said, you know, the question is, when you don't have a teacher who can set this up, how do we still get a situation where we're all playing together? That was the question that for several of us came out of the Paley. It's also for Alfredo and I think, and Julian, thinking about the collective for cultural praxis and mind culture activity is like these questions of sort of how do you take these ways of playing and dialoguing that are working into a larger community. Do you have to change it fundamentally, or is there some way that you can do a larger art project? I don't know.
I have some ideas that are also half-baked. I don't know how many of you read the last book by David Graeber, who wrote The Occupation and the 5,000 Years of Depth and similar things. But the last book that he wrote with he was a philosopher, sociologist. He wrote with David Wengrow, who is an archaeologist, and it's called The Dawn of Everything, and it's really about the newest archaeological discoveries and that are changing the way how we think of the prehistory. And why is that important here is something that Mike said about the Roberts Cave experiment is that there are different activities in which different leadership and different structure of, let's say, internal politics emerges. And one of the things that David Graeber and David Wengrow wrote about are these remains of very large settlements like Stonehenge and Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, where you would think that they require a very hierarchical organizational life in order to create such incredible endeavors like building pyramids or building these huge stone slabs or something like that, which you could imagine that kind of society as very hierarchical, very organized, in order for many people to come together to work on one thing for a long time. But what they found out is that newest discoveries talk about the time when these structures were done is a parallel time with the hunter-gatherer societies, which is again thought of as small communities that are egalitarian, that are democratic, that people come together very close, but they don't have a hierarchical relationships. So one of the things that they were studying is that it is possible to live part of the year, because apparently these people, at least some people in the Americas, lived part of the year, and in Ukraine too, in these big settlements that were building something, and the other part of the year they lived as hunter-gatherers. So it's possible that, and that's somehow something that resonates to them too, as a possibility to create these imaginary chronotopes that we create in play. And so that we are not built in stone, that we have to live in one kind of totalitarian society, whatever we call it, even democracy, if that's just the only right thing to do. But that we can we can accept possibility of parallel worlds, that sometimes we are doing this and sometimes we are organized like that, and something is more appropriate here, and nothing has to permeate completely our lives. In that sense, the identity is also put to test, because you don't have to identify with one ideology or with one way of life. You can be you in different ways, in different parts of the year, or in different communities where you are. And so being able to create situations in which you can be more than, and that's play always. You are always somebody who you aren't. and creating these possibilities that it's okay to test and try out different ways of thinking, living, without betraying anyone, without betraying yourself, that it's possible to have it. And there are some other examples that they give. I think it's a very important book for all of us, because they, for instance, claim that the whole agriculture stems from playing. But I will leave you with that, and I have to go. Yeah, that's true, Julian. More democratic for a long periods of time. And that's maybe true, Julian, that yeah, it depends on what's overarching and what's subordinate. All of these exist all the time, but what's kind of like the democratic communities always accept some kind of pluralism. And I think we are doomed with our monism that comes from the at least in education, that comes from the Enlightenment, that there is one rational truth and one set of values that are right, and like that. So pluralism is the key in some ways. Okay, I now have to leave you.
Yes, having left us with those problems.
Okay, save this.
We'll solve them, but we won't tell you.
Please, since you are recording this, please tell
Of
us where
course.
the recording is going to
We'll
be.
send you a postcard, Anna, that will have the answers on it. I
Right.
thought of an easier way of saying what I said. I'm sorry I took so much time to say it before. All I was really saying is, like, are we trying to invent a new way of doing this that's going to answer the problems now that we're seeing more increased problems? We're seeing more increased problems with trying to achieve dialogue, or is it really like more? Anna, you can go. I'll tell you later. I'll text you. But the question is, like, for me, the question is it just like more of the same? Maybe that's what this book is saying, that it's more of the same. I haven't read it yet, but that, like, I'm just thinking, I went to a union meeting recently and we were having trouble having dialogue. You know, it was a crisis in the union meeting about a question of anyhow, it doesn't matter what it was about, but so one person said, this is the first time I'm in this union, you know, coming to a union meeting, and there's no dialogue. Like, we've had it, the dialogue has dissolved, and everyone like jumped on him and said, are you kidding me? You're just for the first time the person who feels left out of the dialogue. Like, I always feel left out of the dialogue, but I still come here and talk. And then someone else said, and I always feel left out of the dialogue, but I still come here and talk. Why are you even complaining? We don't need anything new. We just need more of what we always do, which is trying to organize at our union meetings despite all hating each other. So I don't know. That's what I'm thinking.
So are we all left speechless now, and we should kind of say this has been super interesting? Or
I've had, that's, I want to just comment on the union meeting. I mean, here are all these people working, and in a sense, it seems like they have a commonality, but I mean, I really appreciate your humor and say you really hate each other, but you're all trying to negotiate what's going to be presumably a position. But Mike, I'm thinking back to, I don't know whether you said it to me or you and Vivian at one point said it to each other, but that I think the coming into any discussion with the assumption that we've got a majority group is just not true. I mean, that the most important thing for a teacher, and I'm pretty sure I can hear Vivian say it, is that 3-year-old that she has might as well be from another planet, another culture, another era in time, historical time period, is to try and think she understands 3 or 5-year-olds, even if they, in her case, she was white, Jewish, an immigrant family. There were so many details of her own background that made her different from every child in that classroom. It so changed me. I could never go into a classroom and think that I had anything in common with those people unless with the students. And already, you know, I was at some point old enough to be their mother or their grandmother or their sister at one point. But my role in the discussion only got more exciting the more I realized I had probably very little in common with them. The music I listened to, the sports I like, whatever. So I still, I wonder if we're, you might say, assuming that discussions go well with homogeneous groups. And Mariette, that's why I want to come back to, in a sense, I want to argue with that data. I don't know why it didn't get off the ground, but I just don't buy it, that there weren't so many reasons to say, I don't have a clue what you're thinking, even if they all grew up in the same town. And now if they have all these immigrant populations who need to know maybe how I think, why isn't there reason to say, I care about what you're thinking?
Mm-hmm. That's the mystery, in a way. Yeah, why would they say, I'm not interested in talking to you? And that one of the teachers was very clear about this, that there was no interest in the other's point of view. There was no interest in explaining oneself even. How can you make that happen?
But if we go back to the Robert's Cave example that Mike brought, what was the key there to make a difference was the fact that the groups ended up having an understanding of a shared goal, something that their conditions of their livelihoods or of their being was at stake for all of them, independently of which group they had come from. And I think schools and educational settings in general, informal education, have been very good at neutralizing any kind of such a set, so that there is nothing at stake that concerns us as a whole, other than getting through this. So I think it's quite natural that I have nothing to say to another person, because it's not going to get me closer or farther from anything I'm pursuing meaningfully. Not to say that that solves the question, but I'm just saying that perhaps it's not surprising if you consider the type of context for engagement that education provides.
Right. I was thinking that, Mariette, that sort of I have nothing to talk to them about is a sort of hopelessness, that anything I said would be useless, right? It would count for nothing.
Yeah.
Right. There's no chance, there's no opportunity for change, because there, you know, it's a kind of hopelessness.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring very quickly, if it matters or if it brings some richness to the discussion, the case in which I work, which is sustainability in Norway. And I've been working in schools that are remarkably homogeneous in terms of backgrounds, which is a bit smelly, because there are some like West versus East schools, and we've been having closer encounters with West schools, which are more homogeneous than other schools and so on. So we haven't encountered much problem of polarization within the classrooms, or and I'm sure there are issues there that we haven't attended to. But when it comes to attending to the question of sustainability and how these students understand their role with respect to the future in a context of environmental crisis, what's remarkable is the lack of conflict, the lack of polarization within that classroom with respect to the issue. It's more like a flat field,
right,
in which I think schools and youth generally haven't been really engaged or confronted with what is at stake for them, other than at the discourse level, not in something they can sense concerns them really. And I think I was listening and reading your text and thinking about these polarization issues that you describe, and which I also have witnessed. But in the context I am looking at, the polarization is one between we as students versus them, those who have the problem. There really is this we versus them, because there is this sense of hopelessness, that there is nothing we can do to deal with this. It's not for us, even though we tend to say that the youth have the key to address they are leading the change and so on. Majority of the students I talk with, and I look at also what teachers tell me, what they see, it's more of a lack of, they should be more galvanized to actually feel that there is something that concerns them at a deeper level than just trying to understand the intellectually what the problem is about. And I think it's a really real challenge for classrooms to create that type of real stakes issues for students, both when it comes to trying to bring together groups that are otherwise polarized, but also to trying to bring in the friction that you were describing in your chapter, the Wittgenstein's metaphor of coming to feel the ground,
Rough ground, yeah.
the rough ground. I think that's the other side of the polarization problem in what I'm observing.
Yeah, that's partly what Anna was saying also, like lack of diversity of opinion or strive. It would be also the end of discussion. So yeah, so this is we need some kind of polarization, friction also to continue. I think that's a positive notion. Yeah. Interestingly, when I was talking with my colleague about the new student generation in the Netherlands, and the so-called woke students, and I was asking for what the topic of their discussion would be with the teacher, they would say sustainability, and this would be a generational issue where they would accuse the staff of not being enough taking into account environmental issues. So it would be an issue of polarization between students and staff, interestingly enough. So any kind of issue could be made into a polarized situation, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so there are too many issues on the table, Mike, I think where do we continue? Because
I think we're, but I'll leave it to the people here if you like to follow up. I mean, we can see various ways in which we can think about it. I just to look up the Robbers Cave thing. I'm just offering that as a kind of a very abstract model. The issue of trying to implement it any particular way at any particular scale is an enormous issue, right? So, but it's sort of rising to the concrete from that example. It may be helpful. I think that this will come around again, right? I don't know. We talk with the people at Cultural Praxis about what we're seeing now, which is this, at some level, there's a common knot of issues around which these separate domains of concerns seem to be always at play. And I'm just feeling intuitively that perhaps through a graduate student or through somebody who has, that we create the time for somebody to come through and help us pull those threads out and create a medium where the right juxtapositions can be there so that others can learn from what we're doing. We can always reschedule and come back again. But I'd leave it to others, not myself, to initiate that. I'm going to sort of continue to raise different issues with different people and try to participate in other parts as well as I can. But there are rich opportunities here for undergraduate and graduate student involvement in research, for sure. Thank you all. This is so informative, the whole process. If I don't mess up too badly, this will be posted in the next few days. And there is a reply function at Cultural Praxis. Use that to communicate. If you'd like to be included in the discussion, I suggest you go to Cultural Praxis and sign up so that you get notified that there is some sort of discussion going on. The way it works right now, if you're not signed up to be part of the discussion, you may not hear about it. So just
yeah, that's a very good point, Mike. You have to go down at the bottom of the post where the discussion is, and then people is commenting below there, and you can comment yourself once you have logged in.
Yeah.
But if you want to get notified when someone else comments or when anyone comments into that post, you click to the subscribe. There is a small label there, subscribe, and choose, and then you will get an email every time someone posts something.
Right. So that's just, the communicative system is a little bit still in flux as we're trying to work out a good way to do it. But there are a lot of materials here, and I'm pretty sure that somebody can find a PDF of Robbers Cave and post it, and other materials. I mean, Anna Shane is like a encyclopedia of practical knowledge in this domain. So it's just really interesting. I'm just looking around and everybody's like, whoa, do they have interesting backgrounds? So it's up, I think, Cultural Practice folks, why don't you take responsibility here for follow-up? And I think there are resources for it, and we can talk about how best to do that. And I will put it up online as fast as I can. Thank you all so much, everybody, for coming. I'm going to say goodbye for now, and I'll email you, or we'll see each other in email. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Sure enough. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.